But in John, we have a problem here, because in John 6:4 it says, "And Passover, a feast of the Jews, was nigh." Now, that adds an entire year, a half year, on to the biblical record of dead silence. Matthew, Mark, and Luke at the end of the summer are all of a sudden silent. John hasn't said anything since Shavuot, and so John goes from Shavuot to next Passover before he says anything again. That doesn't make any sense. A whole half year of dead silence, and then the very next chapter in John is the Feast of Tabernacles. The same chapter in Luke, Tabernacles. The next chapter in Matthew and Mark is Tabernacles. That means that we have an entire year of dead silence without Yeshua doing one single thing that's worthy of comment for a whole year, just because those words in Passover, the Feast of the Jews, was nigh. Well, if you take a look at John chapter 5, verse 1, we'll have a clue to this. It says, "And there was a feast of the Jews, and Yeshua went up to Jerusalem." Now, John wouldn't have said this. We would never say there's a feast of the Jews and we went up to Jerusalem. We'd say what the feast is. You take a look at the feast. 7th Sabbath of the counting of Omer, man who is lame for 38 years is healed. Next day, multitude on the Temple Mount. John speaking of Yeshua in the past tense. And it's Shavuot. It's Shavuot. There's no question. But what does Shavuot mean? How do you translate Shavuot? You translate it as sevens, or weeks, you could. But it means sevens, a feast of sevens. What does that mean to a Greek speaker? There was a feast of sevens. It doesn't make any sense. So, what would they do when they put it in their language, in their particular area? Feast of Sevens doesn't make any sense. There's no context as far as culture or anything else. But what does make sense? There's the Feast of the Jews, and Yeshua went up to Jerusalem. That makes sense. It's vague, but to them, it's okay. It's a Feast of the Jews. But wait, ladies and gentlemen, was it a Feast of the Jews? No, it was not. It's a feast of the Lord, a feast of Yehovah. All right? It's not a feast of the Jews. The original would have said, "And it was Shavuot, Yeshua went up to Jerusalem." That's what it would have said. But in another language, in another culture, it doesn't make sense. Now, we have the feeding of the 5,000 that takes place. It's at the end of the summer. The next thing that's going to take place is Yom Kippur and the Day of Trumpets. The Day of Trumpets, then Yom Kippur, and then the Feast of Tabernacles. It's all there, it's all in line, it all makes perfect sense. We can understand 3.5 weeks of silence from the gospel authors because everyone's busy, they're out there in different communities, Yeshua's teaching around behind them, they get the place prepared, he comes in there and he teaches, they now get together at the end of the 6th month getting ready for the fall feast. It all adds up. What could it have said in the original text? It could have said, "And there was a feast of Yom Teruah was nearing," because that is exactly what Yeshua is addressing in the synagogue on 2 days later. 2 days later, on the Sabbath, he is addressing the last day and the resurrection, which is the theme of Yom Teruah. Now, in the earliest text that we have available to us, those words, "and Passover, a feast of the Jews was nigh," none of those words are in those early texts. Those words were not added until late in the 4th century. And some will say, well, Papyrus 66, P66, it's in there, and that's from the 2nd century. No, it is not. No, those who found it tried to make a case for it, but was found with 5th, 6th, and 7th century manuscripts, and all of a sudden, because of the handwriting, the penmanship, they assign it to an earlier date. Nonsense, ladies and gentlemen. It was Eusebius who came up with the 3.5-year ministry conjecture as a proposed solution to Daniel's 70-week prophecy. It was ludicrous, his proposed solution, that Yeshua's ministry was 3.5 years. But see, he was the court bishop of Constantine. And this is the beginning of the Roman Catholic Church, the Roman Empire, official church-state religion, in which anyone who disagreed with Constantine or his mother lost their life. It was then Eusebius that came up with this proposed solution so that all prophecy is fulfilled. If we can have all of the 9th chapter of Daniel, the 7-week prophecy, all completely fulfilled, then the Torah can be done away with, because Yeshua said, not one jot or tittle, one vowel or consonant of the Torah will pass until all is fulfilled. So they had to get all of it fulfilled. All right? And so this is how Eusebius did it in order for them to start their new church-state religion. And everyone that basically is holding to a 3.5-year ministry is still just mouthing what Rome had put in place back in the 4th century. It's the 4th century that was put in place. And anytime we see those words in Passover, the Feast of the Jews is nigh, anytime we see them in John, we know it's from a manuscript that comes from the late 4th century and beyond.